Before we dive into one of the most remarkable stories in American history, if you enjoy learning about the lives of extraordinary leaders who shaped our world, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss the incredible journey of Abraham Lincoln. From a log cabin to the White House during America's darkest hour, Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in a one-room log cabin in Hodgenville, Kentucky. His family was desperately poor. His father, Thomas Lincoln, was a farmer and carpenter who struggled to make ends meet. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, could neither read nor write, but she possessed a gentle spirit that would profoundly influence young Abraham. Life on the Kentucky frontier was brutal. The Lincolns lived in what could barely be called a cabin, with dirt floors, no windows, and a single door. Abraham's earliest memories were of endless chores, fetching water, splitting wood, and helping his father clear land. Education was a luxury few could afford, and schools were rare and poorly equipped. When Abraham was 7, the family moved to Indiana, seeking better farmland and escaping Kentucky's slaveholding culture. Thomas Lincoln opposed slavery, a moral stance that would deeply impact his son's future. In Indiana, tragedy struck. Abraham's mother died of milk sickness when he was just 9 years old. The loss devastated the young boy, who was already known for his unusual thoughtfulness and melancholy disposition. Despite receiving less than a year of formal schooling throughout his entire childhood, Abraham Lincoln became obsessed with learning. He would walk miles to borrow books, reading by firelight late into the night. His stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston, whom Thomas married a year after Nancy's death, encouraged Abraham's intellectual pursuits. She brought books into the household and recognized something special in the gangly, awkward boy. Lincoln read everything he could find: the Bible, Aesop's fables, Robinson Crusoe, and most importantly, biographies of George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. These stories of self-made men rising from humble origins to greatness inspired him profoundly. He practiced writing with charcoal on wooden boards, as paper was too expensive. His neighbors often found him with a book in hand, even while plowing fields. By his teenage years, Lincoln had developed a reputation as an exceptional storyteller and debater. He was remarkably tall, eventually reaching 6 feet 4 inches, which was extraordinary for that era. Despite his physical strength and skill with an axe, he disliked hunting and avoided violence whenever possible. His empathy extended even to animals, a rare quality on the harsh frontier. At 22, Lincoln left home and moved to New Salem, Illinois, a small frontier village. He worked various jobs, splitting rails for fences, operating a general store, and serving as postmaster. Each position expanded his knowledge of people and business. When his store failed, leaving him deeply in debt, he earned the nickname Honest Abe by spending years repaying every penny he owed. In 1832, the Black Hawk War erupted. Native American leader Black Hawk led his people back into Illinois, seeking to reclaim their ancestral lands. Lincoln volunteered for the militia, and his company elected him captain, his first leadership position. Though he saw no combat, Lincoln later joked that his only battles were against mosquitoes. However, the experience gave him his first taste of military organization and command. This brief military service also marked Lincoln's entry into politics. He ran for the Illinois state legislature in 1832 but lost. Undeterred, he ran again in 1834 and won, beginning a political career that would span 3 decades. Serving in the legislature while studying law books borrowed from a local attorney, Lincoln taught himself the legal profession through sheer determination and countless hours of reading. By 1836, he obtained his law license and moved to Springfield, the new state capital. There, he formed a law partnership and began building a reputation as a skilled attorney. Lincoln's legal career flourished because of his honesty, his ability to explain complex matters simply, and his talent for connecting with common people on juries. His political philosophy was forming during these years. He aligned with the Whig Party, supporting internal improvements, banking institutions, and economic modernization. But more fundamentally, he was developing his moral opposition to slavery. Though not yet an abolitionist, Lincoln believed slavery was morally wrong and that it contradicted America's founding principles. In Springfield, Lincoln's personal life took a dramatic turn. He met Mary Todd, a well-educated woman from a wealthy Kentucky family. Their courtship was turbulent. Lincoln broke off their engagement in 1841, plunging into a severe depression so profound that friends feared for his life. He confided that he felt capable of suicide but lacked the courage to act. This wasn't Lincoln's first bout with depression. Throughout his life, he struggled with what he called the hypo, a deep melancholy that would descend without warning. Yet somehow, this darkness seemed to deepen his empathy and understanding of human suffering, qualities that would later define his presidency. Lincoln and Mary reconciled and married in 1842. Their marriage was complicated but genuine. They had 4 sons, though only one would survive to adulthood. The deaths of his children, particularly 11-year-old Willie during Lincoln's presidency, would add to the profound sadness that marked his character. Lincoln served 1 term in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1847 to 1849. He opposed the Mexican-American War, arguing that President Polk had unnecessarily provoked the conflict. This unpopular stance damaged his political prospects, and he returned to Springfield, seemingly finished with politics. But the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 changed everything. Senator Stephen Douglas proposed allowing new territories to decide for themselves whether to permit slavery, effectively repealing the Missouri Compromise that had restricted slavery's expansion. Lincoln was horrified. He believed that while the Constitution protected slavery where it existed, allowing it to spread contradicted America's founding principles. Lincoln re-entered politics with renewed passion. He joined the new Republican Party, formed specifically to oppose slavery's expansion. His eloquence on the subject was remarkable. He didn't argue for immediate abolition, which was politically impossible, but insisted that slavery was morally wrong and must be placed on a path toward ultimate extinction. In 1858, Lincoln challenged Stephen Douglas for his Senate seat. Their campaign featured 7 legendary debates across Illinois, each lasting 3 hours. Thousands gathered to hear these intellectual giants clash. Douglas defended popular sovereignty, letting each territory choose. Lincoln argued that slavery was a moral issue that couldn't be left to popular vote. Lincoln's speeches during these debates revealed his political genius. At Quincy, he declared, "I have always hated slavery. I think as much as any abolitionist." Yet he carefully distanced himself from radical abolitionists, knowing most voters weren't ready for immediate emancipation. He walked a delicate line, satisfying his conscience while remaining electable. Douglas won the Senate race through legislative maneuvering, but Lincoln won something more valuable: national recognition. His arguments against slavery, particularly his House-divided speech warning that America could not remain permanently half slave and half free, resonated across the North. By 1860, the Democratic Party split over slavery, fielding 2 candidates. The Republican Party nominated Lincoln on the 3rd ballot, partly because he had fewer enemies than frontrunner William Seward. Lincoln's moderate position, opposing slavery's expansion while accepting its existence where established, appealed to Northern voters uncomfortable with both slavery and radical abolitionism. Lincoln won the presidency with less than 40% of the popular vote, not appearing on ballots in most Southern states. His election triggered the greatest crisis in American history. Southern states, convinced Lincoln would destroy their way of life, began seceding even before his inauguration. South Carolina left the Union in December 1860, followed by 6 more states by February 1861. They formed the Confederate States of America, electing Jefferson Davis as president. Lincoln faced an impossible situation. He believed secession was illegal and unconstitutional, yet he also opposed war and desperately wanted peaceful reunion. His inaugural address on March 4, 1861, was a masterpiece of both firmness and conciliation. He declared secession illegal and vowed to hold federal property in Southern states. But he also promised not to interfere with slavery where it existed and appealed to Southerners. Patriotism. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. The crisis came to a head at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. Major Robert Anderson commanded a small Union garrison occupying this federal fort. South Carolina demanded its surrender. Lincoln faced a terrible choice: resupply the fort and likely trigger war, or abandon it and essentially recognize Confederate independence. Lincoln chose a middle path. He notified South Carolina he would send only food, not weapons or reinforcements. Confederate leaders, convinced that compromise was impossible, decided to act first. On April 12, 1861, Confederate artillery opened fire on Fort Sumter. After 34 hours of bombardment, Anderson surrendered. The Civil War had begun. Lincoln immediately called for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion. This call to arms pushed for more states, including Virginia, into the Confederacy. The nation Lincoln loved was now fully divided, preparing for a conflict that would claim more American lives than all other U.S. wars combined. Lincoln entered the presidency with no military experience beyond his brief, uneventful militia service during the Black Hawk War. Now he commanded a nation at war. The North possessed overwhelming advantages: more population, more industry, more railroads, and more money. Yet the Confederacy had better generals, defensive advantages, and fierce motivation to protect their homeland. The war's first major battle came at Bull Run in July 1861. Confident Union forces marched toward Richmond, the Confederate capital. Spectators from Washington, expecting easy victory, came with picnic baskets to watch. Instead, they witnessed disaster. Confederate forces routed the Union Army, sending soldiers and civilians fleeing back to Washington in panic. Lincoln realized this would be a long, terrible war. He spent countless hours in the War Department telegraph office, reading battlefield reports and sending orders. He studied military strategy books late into the night, teaching himself the art of war. His genius for understanding complex situations and explaining them simply proved invaluable. But Lincoln's greatest challenge was finding competent generals. George McClellan, commander of the Army of the Potomac, was brilliant at training soldiers but terrified of fighting. He constantly demanded more troops and found excuses to avoid battle. Lincoln's frustration grew. After McClellan wasted weeks reorganizing following the bloody Battle of Antietam in September 1862, Lincoln supposedly quipped, "If General McClellan does not want to use the army, I would like to borrow it." Initially, Lincoln defined the war's purpose narrowly: preserving the Union. He feared that making it about slavery would alienate border states like Kentucky and Maryland, slave states that remained in the Union. He even countermanded orders by generals who freed slaves in captured territories, insisting only he had that authority. But as the war dragged on and casualties mounted, Lincoln's position evolved. Slavery was the war's root cause. Ending it would weaken the Confederacy economically and morally. It would prevent European powers from recognizing the Confederacy, as Britain and France wouldn't support a war explicitly defending slavery. After Antietam gave him the victory he needed, Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation in September 1862. On January 1, 1863, he signed the final version, declaring all slaves in rebel states forever free. The proclamation was limited, applying only to areas in rebellion, not border states or Union-controlled Southern territory. But it transformed the war's meaning. Critics attacked from all sides. Abolitionists said it didn't go far enough. Democrats called it unconstitutional. But Lincoln understood something profound. The proclamation changed the war's moral calculus. Now Union armies were armies of liberation. The war became about human freedom, not just political boundaries. African Americans could now serve in Union forces. Nearly 200,000 black soldiers and sailors joined, fighting with extraordinary courage and suffering disproportionate casualties. Lincoln met with Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist leader, and came to respect black Americans' contributions and humanity in ways few white Americans of his era did. July 1863 brought the war's turning point. At Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Robert E. Lee's second invasion of the North ended in catastrophic defeat after 3 days of brutal fighting. Simultaneously, Ulysses S. Grant captured Vicksburg, giving the Union control of the Mississippi River and splitting the Confederacy. For months after Gettysburg, Lincoln traveled there to dedicate a cemetery for the fallen soldiers. His Gettysburg address lasted just 2 minutes and contained only 272 words. He spoke of America as a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He redefined the war as a test of whether democratic government could survive, calling for a new birth of freedom. The speech initially received mixed reviews, but it became perhaps the greatest presidential address in American history, crystallizing the war's meaning in immortal prose. Lincoln promoted Grant to command all Union armies in 1864. Grant understood what previous commanders hadn't. The North must use its numerical advantages relentlessly. The campaigns of 1864 were horrifically bloody. Grant lost more men in 6 weeks than previous commanders had in a year. earning the nickname the Butcher. But unlike others, Grant kept advancing. As the 1864 election approached, Lincoln expected to lose. War weariness plagued the North. His opponent, George McClellan, ran on a peace platform. Lincoln prepared for defeat, writing a memo stating that he would cooperate with the president-elect to save the Union before inauguration. Then William Tecumseh Sherman captured Atlanta in September. The war's end seemed possible. Northern voters rallied to Lincoln, re-electing him decisively. His second inaugural address in March 1865 was a masterpiece of reconciliation, with victory approaching. He spoke of malice toward none and charity for all, urging Americans to bind up the nation's wounds. On April 9, 1865, Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The war was over. The Union was preserved. Slavery was ending, soon to be constitutionally abolished by the 13th Amendment. 5 days after Lee's surrender, on Good Friday, April 14, 1865, Lincoln attended Ford's Theater with his wife. He was relaxed and happy, discussing plans for their future. During the third act, actor John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, entered Lincoln's box and shot him in the head. Lincoln died the next morning, becoming the first American president assassinated. The nation that had celebrated peace days earlier plunged into mourning. Lincoln's body traveled by train across America, with millions paying respects. The self-educated frontier lawyer, who had preserved the Union and freed 4 million enslaved people, had given, in his own words, the last full measure of devotion. Abraham Lincoln transformed America. He proved that democracy could survive its greatest test. He ended slavery, expanded federal power, and redefined American ideals. From a log cabin to martyrdom, his journey embodied America's promise that anyone, regardless of birth, could achieve greatness through character, determination, and devotion to noble principles. If you enjoyed this incredible journey through Abraham Lincoln's life, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who appreciate history's greatest stories. What aspect of Lincoln's life impressed you most? Let us know in the comments below.